I'm Matthew Kurbis, the subscription attorney, and this is Law Subscribed, your dedicated source for all things subscriptions and the law. Thank you to my sponsors. See links to them in the show notes. Everything discussed is only for educational and entertainment purposes. Enjoy the show. We're live, and we've already got a couple of people that have joined us. For those of you who maybe just saw this few seconds before I actually click go live, there's a little bit of a lag and a delay, so welcome. Everybody, okay, we have more people trickling in. This is great. This is another Law Subscribed Live, and I'm really lucky today to have with me as a guest, Niki Black. Niki, I have a feeling everyone who's attending today or is listening is probably already familiar with your stuff. But just in case, for a brief little intro, if you wanted to tell people who you are, what you do, where they could go read up and read some of what you're putting out there.
Sure. My name is Niki Black. I am the Principal Legal Insights Strategist at AffiniPay, which is the parent company of MyCase, LawPay, Case Peer, and DocketWise. And I am a lawyer and a Legaltech journalist. I write regular Legaltech columns for the ABA Journal, Above the Law, and the Daily Record. And I've also written a few books. I co-authored Social Media for Lawyers with Carolyn Elephant, Cloud Computing for Lawyers. I wrote myself. Those are both published by the ABA. And I, for a decade, co-authored a Thomson Reuters treatise, Criminal Law New York, with a local judge here in Rochester, New York, which is where I'm based. Looking forward to talking to you today.
Yeah, and if this is your first time hearing Niki, just know that almost every Friday, although probably not the rest of this year, he's on Bob Ambrosia's Legal Tech Week Live, usually. And so you could always catch more of Niki there in the future, too. And for those of you who are listening to this as a podcast, links and everything in the show notes to all of the things Niki just mentioned. But speaking of Legal Tech Week Live and just a lot of your publications, You've been saying for a while about how the demise of the billable hour is something that you could see, and I just want to give you basically a platform where you get to deep dive on that, because my audience, that's the main reason they tune into my stuff, is to hear about how the billable hour is going to be over. Of course, there's a slant towards subscription, but legal tech and AI play a really big role in that. And so I guess just let's get your thoughts on why you think now is the time, in particular with the AI efficiencies that we're seeing here and what those efficiencies are and where you're seeing them, why maybe folks who are billing their time should start thinking differently.
Sure. So before generative AI, and I would sort of say before the pandemic even, the way that I still thought that the billable hour was sort of under attack, if you will, because of all the efficiencies gained from legal software in general. And my thinking at the time was more that what you would find is that a lot of large firm lawyers that had left firms and formed boutique firms were in a really good position to undercut their former employers and other large law firms because they had the expertise, had a very focused area of practice, and they could, based upon their past experience, come up with reasonable either alternative fees or flat fees that would help them be more competitive against these large firms that were really just only hourly billing, and also would help them meet clients where they sat, where clients really don't want hourly billing. But within the last 5 years, I had to hire an attorney, and it was supposed to be flat fee billing, but then there was like hourly billing on top of it. Honestly, it didn't make sense, but I got really annoyed every time I got these bills that had some hourly fees on there, because 7 people would look at the same document, and each that took me 0.2 to read, and they would all charge 0.5, and it didn't make sense why they had multiple people from paralegal to associate to attorney reading the same thing, and I'm taking much longer than it took me, also an attorney, to read this thing. So I was frustrated, and I completely understand why most legal consumers are. So this is sort of where I had been coming at it prior to sort of the advent or generative AI sort of appearing on the scene in November 2022. And generative AI really changes everything, in my opinion. And my legal tech colleagues and I, the journalists and I, dispute this ardently, and we all come in on different sides of the fence on this. And I'm on the side that really thinks that this is going to be the tipping point. And the reason that I think that it's going to be the tipping point, in essence, is there's 2 things that are going to be happening. One is generative AI significantly increases efficiencies in workflows, and it continues to do so the longer it's around and as more firms adopt it. And the second is that as generative AI is rolled out into the tools that lawyers use to run the business side of their practices, and I'm essentially thinking law practice management software and legal billing software, you can use that generative AI as it becomes more deeply integrated and developed to analyze all of the past billing and client data for all different types of cases. And you can have the generative AI help you figure out competitive pricing plans that will allow you to make profit and also be more competitive in the marketplace and also meet your consumers where they're at so they have predictable pricing. And I definitely have more to say about that as well. But those are sort of the two main areas where I see these drivers happening.
Yeah, and something else that you brought up that I think is really important to talk about as part of this conversation is how multiple people, when they were helping you with your legal situation, looked at the document. And they probably want to do that, I would think. Although, let's be real, maybe they are just trying to pump up their bill. But in the thinking about the best case scenario, they're trying to provide you with more value by having multiple people at the firm help with this document, whether it's drafting it or redlining it or whatever it is.
Well, to be clear, it was a form that had been sent in.
Oh, wow.
Document is pretty predictable.
Well, maybe that's a bad example. But the point is I know, having been a litigator doing insurance defense work, that if there were going to be two lawyers at a deposition or at a hearing, we had to have a really good reason to explain why. And it couldn't just be for training purposes, right? There had to be a strategic reason that I was also at the hearing with the partner who was managing that file, right? Because I took the deposition maybe. Because clients don't want to double pay for things. But there could be really good strategic value to having multiple lawyers work on something or multiple team members that would have had billable hours do something. But when you stop billing your time, and I think about like Aegis Space Law comes to mind, Jack Shelton, who was a recent guest on my podcast, like their team is working together on things a lot more because they're not billing by the hour, right? And I'm a true solo, so I don't really get to explain that to my clients. So what do you think about that, though, that paradigm of it's more valuable if multiple people work on it? I mean, but when you're nickel and diming, hey, why, you want to know why when you're billing by the hour as opposed to this is your fixed rate or this is your recurring fixed rate. Now, however many people need to work on this to get you the best outcome are going to work on it. What do you think about that?
Well, I think as a legal consumer, that's a lot more palatable, right? Because you don't really care who's looking at it or who's not looking at it as long as you get to that outcome. Sure, you may get, depending on how they're going to let you know what they're doing, an itemized description of what's been happening behind the scenes or something, but you're not paying for it. You're just getting that as an update. Whereas when you're paying for it, you don't even want to call the lawyer because it's going to cost you money. You don't want to email the lawyer because it's going to cost you money. And if you do, you want to be incredibly prepared so it can go in as quickly as possible. So I think it just puts a lot of unwelcome pressure on the legal consumer when you're billing by the hour. And so the idea that a whole team, whoever needs to look at this thing, needs to look at it to get the input to reach an informed next stage step, that's fine with me if I'm a legal consumer is not paying hourly. But if I'm paying hourly, I tend to be a little suspicious of why you've got this many people looking at the same thing, especially as an attorney myself. It took me 0.2 to read it and understand it. And I don't know why they were reading so slow, but that's a different issue. And it was a couple of years ago. Still not quite over it, but I did get a discount off that bill.
Obviously, but you're a more sophisticated consumer as an attorney of legal services, right? And also, if you're paying by the hour, you want to know why it took them so long. When you're not paying by the hour, yeah, sure, you want to know that they reviewed the document for you, but do you need to know how long it took? No,
right.
Doesn't make any sense.
The sophisticated consumer it's one thing. That's an interesting point, and that's one thing that I really wanted to talk about in terms of generative AI and how it would be impacting legal services moving forward. And it is those sophisticated consumers that I think are going to drive it. And I think of two different types of sophisticated consumers, and specifically, and those are when you are a law firm that has an insurance provider as your client, like an insurance company, or when you're in-house counsel and you use outside counsel. So you are the client for outside counsel. So in these two situations, the legal teams within a company are a sophisticated consumer, and the insurance companies are sophisticated consumers of legal services. And what I think you're going to see happening there is, and my personal experience has been being a lawyer working for insurance companies when I was with a law firm, a litigation firm. And in that situation, even way back when in the early 2000s, they would 100% write off different things if you used the wrong words, if you had too many people looking at a document, if a paralegal was doing administrative work. Like, all they did and all they continue to do is read those timesheets that are submitted, incredibly carefully and write things off. They're only going to do that even more with generative AI because now they know that you don't need to take an hour to summarize a document. You can have generative AI do it in a minute. You don't need to have an associate review a deposition and summarize it for you. You can have generative AI do that in 3 minutes.
Niki,
right?
that was a whole billable day for me, was just summarizing depositions I didn't take.
Right. Me too. That's what I used to do. And in some ways, it's a learning. It teaches you what a deposition looks like, what deposition objections look like, and how it works, especially compared to a trial, which is what I'd been used to as a public defender coming into that. And I'd never done depositions. But, and that's a whole separate issue that could be in a whole episode, is how are you going to start training young attorneys now that generative AI is doing that? But that could be an entire separate episode.
Or if it matters. If it matters, frankly, because I'm thinking about my first hire, right? I want them leveraging AI up the wazoo already, and I want them to know how to leverage the tool to get to the outcome. And however they get there, whether that's through having to I could fix some things around my house. I don't know how to build a house, and I don't think that that's relevant or necessary, really, right? And so, I mean, that's not a perfect example. That's off the top of my head. But I think that I just need somebody who could leverage the tools to get the output. And I don't care how they get there. And because I'm a solo and I'm not some big firm that could afford to pay to train and to have clients willing to pay to train, I need somebody who's practice ready using these tools. And frankly, I think they could come out at a 5-year associate if they're leveraging the right tools and if, fresh out of law school. And so I don't think that is an important question to ask. But I also don't think it matters, because I think they just have to learn how to use the current tech that's out there to get to the good results and understand why. And that's what they should be learning in law school. Just my perspective.
I hear what you're saying. I disagree a little bit. And that's why I think this could be an episode in and of itself. But I do think that law schools are going to need to change how they educate and train their students. And I don't think they have a lot of incentive to do that. And so that's where I think we're going to run into some difficulties moving forward. And I think at some point, the pressure on them is going to be so significant that they're going to have to change and find ways to make them practice ready, because you're not practice ready out of law school. We all know that. But they aren't now, and they're not going to be for quite a while, but different issue.
But speaking of pressure, though, going back to the insurance companies example, so because the insurance companies are sophisticated and they know AI could have saved so much time on this and have been of a sufficient quality, over time, those hours are going to get chipped away. And so just from a pure profitability standpoint, billing time isn't probably going to make a heck of a lot of sense. And there are reasons I think the insurance companies will want to keep paying by the hour. But I think law firms will then be incentivized to think about the output or the work being what's valuable for the client, whether it's an insurance company or any client, and what is that worth to them. And we still have a monopoly on legal services. Mostly. So I think but the sooner we act because of that monopoly, which we might not have forever, the sooner we'll be able to a little bit control that conversation rather than just wait until the insurance company has cut away all those superfluous hours that you were billing that you didn't need to bill. And now you're not able to make any money because you're still billing by the hour and there's only so many things. And I don't think ethically you could charge $20,000 an hour. I don't think that that's going to fly with bar associations or with state Supreme Courts.
Right, for sure. And I do think that the idea, like ethics, and also sort of come into this as well, because when it's clear that you can use generative AI to streamline your practice, to streamline the work that you're doing, and when your clients start to expect that, and that sort of becomes the competitive edge that most people are doing or that you're trying to keep up with. If you aren't using these tools, I think it's going to get to a point a lot quicker than it has with other tools, that if you're not using them, it almost borders on malpractice. And certainly there are some ethical issues that come up as well. Like I do feel like that happened with, cloud computing. It used to be when my book came out in 2012, it almost didn't get published because there was just a lot of pushback internally. And it was almost like blasphemous to say that the cloud's safe, let alone safer than server-based tools. And now with phishing and malware and hacking, but really not even hacking as much as just phishing and malware, everyone is, and the idea that your server-based stuff can be held hostage, right? Everyone's saying that the cloud is actually more secure because they have more sophisticated measures in place than most law firm IT staff have in place, especially with all those gaps in the employee training not being what it should be about what to click on and what not to click on, and with everything getting more sophisticated with AI backing up all the scams. So, it's interesting how it's almost malpractice at this point not to use cloud computing to preserve, or unethical, to safeguard your client's data. And it's it became essentially malpractice as a litigator not to follow social media and understand how social media worked because there was evidence on social media, right? And these are all things that everyone poo-pooed when I wrote about it and was urging lawyers to get it. And now it sort of almost borders on like unethical or malpractice not to use these things. And I think with AI and its rapid development, we're going to end up in that same situation with AI much faster than we did with those other tools. And that
I'm having a debate recently about whether or not we should even have an episode on AI on another podcast that I'm co-host of, because they're like, oh, we've talked about it to death, but not really. Like what you just said, like if you're listening to this, you're still early. If you're watching or listening to this within a few months since we went live, like now's the time to learn and figure it out. I mean, I just saw something from some Illinois judges, from one of the county judges for state court, about like they just have some order now that they're going to be learning about AI and how to incorporate it into the judicial system. I mean, that's amazing, right? That they're doing that. So you're still early. We're still learning. Any other sort of efficiencies that are part of the practice? Because when you talk about this, like clients were using social media, clients were using the cloud. Like one of my first times using the cloud in a law firm was because the clients demanded that we upload our documents and do things in their cloud-based platform. Like, will that happen with AI? They're like, okay, well, we're using whatever, name your AI tool that's designed for insurance companies or in-house teams or whatever, and now the outside counsel are being forced to use the same tool. Do you think we'll see something like that?
Well, I think anything that you saw happening with the cloud is going to happen with AI, and it's going to happen a lot faster. So I certainly think that's feasible. I think you're just going to see adoption happen more quickly. Client demands about it happen a lot faster than they did before. And the more sophisticated the client, the more pressure is going to be on you to use generative AI to increase efficiencies. And it can also, as I'd alluded to earlier, the other use case is going to be to help you price more competitively in this space as well. So I think that's another interesting area to explore too.
Right. And we know lawyers are bad at math and that we don't like looking at data if we could avoid it. But you know what's really good at math when it integrates with Wolfram Alpha? AI. It's like, if it's leveraging the right API, it's actually really good at analyzing data that are like numerical data and doing formulas and stuff like that. So I think you're absolutely right onto that. And, the insurance companies are probably going to do it first. So law firms, it behooves you to start analyzing your data and seeing what your average, case value or matter value is worth. Now, from a subscription standpoint, though, Niki, and this is where I don't even know if AI is going to solve this problem. If I'm looking at one case or one matter as a one-off thing, I will only be getting data and thinking about things in terms of a one-off thing. One of the benefits of the subscription model is you're thinking about lifetime value. So, for example, in litigation for insurance, who better than litigators to help with litigation avoidance? They are the experts in litigation. They've seen it all go wrong. As an ongoing service, you can provide litigation avoidance. And that you're looking at a totally different type of service that isn't being offered by litigators now, that you're not going to be paying for by the hour, but probably on subscription. So there's not really data to analyze there. So what do you think about that type of a situation?
Well, I think this is where generative AI comes in. Like I just was on the ABA Journal's Legal Rebel podcast, and I also just wrote my year-end article where I talk about the trends of 2024. And one of the things that we had talked about in the podcast that I've also written about is that generative AI is the interface has been a big trend. So what is happening is it's making the software that is sometimes either clunky or the reports that are just kind of challenging to run because of the types of data that they involve. It's making it more accessible to lawyers and legal professionals so that they can fully access the power of the software that they're using. And that's the first point, is that the software your firm's using, it has either rolled out generative AI features and will continue to do so, or it'll be happening really soon. So essentially, you need to start figuring out what the providers you're already using have in what their roadmaps look like for generative AI so that you can understand how you can leverage what they're doing already. Because what generative AI is great at is taking a data set and pulling information out of it in all the different ways that you need it pulled out and analyzing it and presenting it to you in a way that is digestible. And so it becomes really valuable in legal research. You see that with Thomson Reuters and LexisNexis and VLEX, how they own all these treatises and all this data and all the case law and all the laws. And from that, they can make legal research incredibly accessible and more streamlined. You can do the same thing with your law firm's secure, guardrail data. when your law firm's data is used as that in a secure environment, as that data from which the information is pulled from, it can be incredibly useful when you, like your law practice management or legal billing system. It can look at past data and it can tell you how profitable you were for a specific type of case, a specific case, or all those cases across the board, how long they lasted, how much you charged for each, how profitable each one was, how many people worked on it, and what it looked like across the board for their, how much they charged per person, or even predictive, right? Like it can give you predictive analytics, which is where you would roll more into this subscription concept. It can look at all these past cases that you've handled that are litigation, or giving advice to clients that are on retainer, perhaps, and predict what it would look like for this sort of new category of legal services where you're doing litigation avoidance. Is that what you said? Litigation avoidance, right? And what would that look like if a particular client has had this many types of litigation against it since you've been representing them? You can kind of predict how often they're going to get sued, in theory, or else the AI can do a better job at that. But then it can help you sort of come up with pricing for these new different types of alternative fee pricing that maybe wouldn't have otherwise been available before because it would have been so hard to predict, but the AI can do that for you. So there's a lot of exciting possibilities, I think, especially as the tools your firm uses that has all of your client data secured and your law firm operating data and your law firm financial data. It can start really providing you with really useful insights that can help you run a more competitive priced law practice.
Yeah. And just on the litigation avoidance thing, from my perspective, it's you have weekly or monthly meetings and you're proactive rather than reactive, right? So it's not necessarily about waiting for something bad to happen. And I think a lot of this AI-powered e-discovery software will actually let you identify things really quickly, like faster, like, oh, there's something that could lead to litigation, right? Rather than waiting until there's litigation and using the e-discovery software to figure out, to do the search, do it on the front end. But the e-discovery platforms don't like that because they make more money doing it the other way because they're also thinking in terms of short-term value. Whole different conversation. So Niki, somebody says, okay, great. I love it. AI could do it. I believe in it. I'm using AI, but I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a pricing expert. Like, I don't even know the right questions to ask. So I'm curious to know what you think on this. I'll tell you a little bit what I think we're going to see, like with what VLEX is doing, where VLEX is taking the initial prompting out and they're just putting like buttons and they're like, click like, okay, analyze this data. And your my cases, your practice platforms, like they will just they've already done the prompts in the background. You just need to click the button and it will do the data analysis. That's one thing. Another thing you could do is the power of personas, right? Where it's like, you're a data analyst for a law firm. You're a pricing expert for a law firm. I'm the lawyer. I need you to analyze my data, or just ask it like, what prompt should I ask? I was just using Copilot with a client. I'm not in the Microsoft ecosystem, but he's paying for Copilot, the paid version. And we were trying to do something in Word with Copilot. We couldn't figure it out. So we asked Copilot in a separate window how to prompt to get the output that we wanted, and we were able to get it. So that's been my experience with that. Like, are you seeing similar things? You share a similar perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I was originally on our AI strategy team before we rolled our strategy out, and I talked to the developers pretty frequently and our product people, and also when I wear my press at conferences, I talk to other companies about their AI rollouts. And generally, what we're seeing across the board is that when the user is able to just enter their own query, sometimes the results are not what they're seeking, and they're also not always what you would want it to be provided to them, because sometimes AI just does weird stuff, right? So when you can tightly control the prompt on the back end, you're going to get the result they're looking for. And how do you know what result they're looking for? You got to talk to your customers, and you have to have alpha testers, beta testers, and you have to be very careful about rolling this out because they trust you. You're a trusted partner, and this is confidential data. And so that's why I think what we've seen, and this is another thing I've spoken about and wrote about, is, you're seeing like a flurry of activity where everybody rolled out these easier things like summarize a document or change text or whatever the case may be. But that deep development where you can avoid error-prone results takes longer time. And so, and then the other thing you have to do is build those prompts in on the back end, because that reduces the hallucinations. It reduces the wayward responses that you might otherwise not want and that the client's not looking for either. So what they do is they do exactly what you said, is start providing drop-down menus. And VLEX does it in a really interesting way. You enter the query you want, but from that, they then take you to the drop-down menus. They determine what you're looking for based upon your initial query, and then you're in the drop-down menu. It doesn't look like drop-down menus, but that's what it is. It's a better interface. But ultimately, that's going to be, I think, the way that everybody does this moving forward. because that's just going to be the way that the client gets the results they're truly looking for.
In particular for industry specific type of Gen AI
Yeah.
that we're seeing. Because I kind of like the weird stuff that ChatGPT and Claude used to do.
For sure.
And it doesn't do it anymore though. And yeah, I've been thinking like, do I need to download Llama? Like I got a new M4 Pro, Mac Mini. Like I think I want to download Llama and like see the crazy stuff AI could come up with, because these models, they're not letting us do it anymore.
Yeah, they've definitely guardrailed it because of all they get horrible press when something goes awry, right? And also the AIs are telling people to kill themselves. They're telling people to shoot their parents. Like there's a lot of that, like character AIs having those issues. That's like an app, but you want to make sure that it doesn't derail itself, or it's just, I don't know, says inappropriate things. Like some people had it falling in love with them and getting mad when they were signing off. I don't even know, but like it does weird stuff for sure.
Yeah, I mean, when you're trained on all of Reddit, possibly you're going to get some weird things that come out of it, right?
Well, it reminds me of that years ago. When I talk about AI, I use some of those early examples. Remember the bot that got released onto Twitter and they had to take it down within an hour and a half because it was designed to be trained on the input. It ended up just being a racist, sexist, like asshole within a matter of an hour or two. So they had to take it down because of the input from the internet,
Yeah. I think about it like with kids though. Like I don't think we should not train the AI on the bad stuff. We should just highlight that that's the bad stuff and we want the good stuff. And I know that that's subjective, and that's why we'll have multiple AI models that have different biases, because you can't eliminate bias, but you can control for bias. And hopefully you could control for different biases among multiple AI models, and you could get to a more bias-free output when you leverage a multi-model solution.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But maybe that's too deep on the AI science of it all for this type of a conversation. If people gave you some pushback and said, well, okay, I get the whole AI efficiencies thing and the legal tech efficiencies before that, but the billable hour survived then. It's going to survive in the future. It's going to be around forever. We're never ending the billable hour. Like, what do you say to something like that?
Well, that's what some of my colleagues say. And some of the points that they raise are, especially in a large or larger law firm context, the entire firm is structured around the billable hour, compensation and productivity and analyzing, who's the most productive, who makes the most money. How do you do that if you take their entire structure, profit structure and compensation structure, and just the attitudes, what they have learned over the years would have to change. And they, are people that, especially those who have worked in those firms at high levels, managing partners or whatever, suggest that it's just, it's going to be very hard to change that within those larger firms. And, they've got a point, but that's where I think the competitive marketplace comes in. And that's where I fall back onto what I'd said before, generative AI, when you have these boutique firms and mid-sized firms, although they're usually the slowest to adopt tech historically. But once they start undercutting you price-wise in a way that actually hurts, then the large firms may be forced to truly restructure. And also when outside counsel is saying, hey, no, or in-house counsel is saying to outside counsel in the firms, we're not paying that. Maybe they're gradually going to have to start restructuring some of their practice areas and practice groups based upon the client input. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. I think market competition is like the biggest thing, right? It's going to be other lawyers coming in. And frankly, it's going to be also not even that type of market competition, but within like human capital, like the lawyers, right? Like the lawyers are not going to want to go work at big law firms when subscription-based or fixed fee-based law firms are doing 4 days a week, 4-day work weeks. Like who's going to want to go work for a big law firm at that point?
And Gen Z is definitely different. I've got 2 Gen Z kids. They're 20 and 22. And all the data is showing that with the older Gen Zs that are coming out of law schools, a couple years older than my kids, but their perspective on work-life balance and what they actually want to get out of life is very different. You're even seeing like a lot of kids in that generation not even go to college and go into trade schools instead, because they're looking at the social contract a little differently and they really don't like what they see. So and AI is going to impact everything. And I think they're seeing that too.
Yeah, and that's only going to make it more competitive for the fewer lawyers that are being pumped out by law schools that are getting licensed, right? If
this year there was,
people aren't going.
I think I read there were more lawyers applying than in a long time, students applying into law school. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But
but market forces, though, I think ultimately will win out. I agree with you there. I think the sunk cost fallacy is the greatest enemy of those of us trying to end the billable hour. Because also, I for one think insurance companies don't want to move away from the billable hour because of all their sunk costs into analyzing bills, staffing whole departments to analyze bills. So I could see the other argument saying, no, they're always going to do billable hour because they all this sunk cost fallacy into this model. So I think asking the question then of how do we overcome this sunk cost fallacy for large firms, for insurance companies, for institutional clients, I think that's, if we could answer that question, I think we start ending the billable hours sooner. And I don't know what that is, but market forces will be a good way to show if you want to compete, you got to break free of that sunk cost fallacy. So at least right now, I think that's the best argument. Hopefully they could imagine it before it actually starts happening.
Well, I think insurance companies are going to be ahead of the curve compared to law firms, because as much as I think capitalism is like the death of our culture right now, I think that with capitalism and with boards for, public companies or private companies, right? Like those boards really, profit is important, and generative AI and the efficiencies it brings increases profit. But law firms are run differently. Law firms are run by the partners, not, and lawyers and doctors are always historically horrible business people. And you see that with law firms, and the trends where like the managing partners make these horrible short-term decisions because they're going to be retiring soon. Like a lot of the boomers did this. And so they make these horrible short-term decisions to maximize their profit before they retire. And that's sort of how it's incentivized when law firms are run by the people at the top without some sort of like outside body that balances their decision-making process. And until we have non-lawyers, and that's a whole other trend, right? Non-lawyers owning firms, and we're seeing some of that experimentation going on in theory to bridge the access to justice. But I honestly think it's we're gonna end up going, what happened in England is going to happen here, where it's just the big four comes in and we start running firms like businesses.
I'm more lukewarm on that idea than I am for getting rid of the fee splitting prohibition, because that has all these unintended consequences of how I could use software in some situations, and that I'm hamstrung by the fee splitting provision for things that you shouldn't be. As we start to wrap up the conversation here, I'll just say, I think we already answered the question earlier in our conversation about the lawyers at big firms that say, well, our incentives are around the billable hour and all these things are on the billable hour. It's use AI, tell it you're a pricing expert, you're a law firm business model expert, and use AI to come up with more solutions. If you don't know how, use AI and use multiple models and use the power persona. So we already answered that question. So I think that's the retort to your colleagues on that weekly talk. That's like, well, they don't know how to do it. AI can help them do it.
Well, there's no incentive. They're not incentivized is part of what they're saying too. They don't want to.
Market forces, and then market forces come in to hopefully create some incentive.
Right.
Just looking at the broader legal tech ecosystem, I've helped some of these big law associates, one partner, but mostly associates, leave big law to start subscription-based law firms just this year. And I could do more of it if I wasn't practicing law full-time. But one of the things is Legaltech in particular isn't built purpose first for subscription billing. And there's fixed fees, there's payment plans, there's things around subscription, but not like SaaS products, not like true subscription type billing that's out there. So they're using Stripe, they're using other things. I'm curious to get your perspective on why you think that is, and when we might be able to see some legal tech out there maybe actually helping. I mean, there is Fidu, there's Kim Bennett's companies. That's like the one exception to the rule, right? But other than Fidu, I've talked to them. I've had them on my podcast. They would love more competition in the space, rising tide and all that. So what's your perspective on why we're not seeing this, and what lawyers who are interested in using subscription billing need to do to see it from their legal tech providers?
Well, and I think it's an interesting question. I think you're talking like purpose built, like as the system, at least my familiarity with most software, billing software, as it exists, there are payment plan options available. Granted, they're not purpose built for what you're talking about, subscription based. So, and I think based upon what I know, having been in a tech company for 13 years, wearing a tech press hat and interviewing tech companies all the time, most product rollouts and development are based upon customer input and market input, right? Like potential customers as well. And, so everything is prioritized oftentimes in that way, along with company goals and objectives for the upcoming year. There's a couple of different factors that go into deciding what gets built into a product. And my guess is that they're just, because you're telling me that nobody has this yet other than maybe one company, my guess is just there's not a huge demand. And maybe that is something that will change, especially with AI changing, the market forces and changing the competitive landscape. And so it's possible that that's going to make it that there isn't enough demand that it becomes a priority. But again, I'm sort of hypothesizing here. I don't know the answer to that specifically.
Well, what I'll say is, and this is a thought I've had during this conversation, is every legal tech platform company, they bill on subscription, and they let a subscriber go from one tier to the next tier. That's all we're asking for. Like, we need like a Shopify-like experience on subscription, but for law firms, and they're already implementing this in their own business. Can you flip a switch and turn that on for the law firms to leverage? And so I'm just putting it out there into the ether, because the non-legal tech subscription-based solutions are not purpose-built for law firms, and there's a lot of downsides with that. And so that's why I'm just putting it out there. I think if they've already using the tech internally, they might be able to turn it around and make it an external use case. Just an idea.
That's a good one. It's definitely food for thought.
All right. Well, any last thoughts here? And I haven't really been monitoring the chat that much, although I haven't seen anything come in. That we've had tens of people come and go throughout this conversation. This is the last chance. If anyone wants to ask a question for Niki live, you get the chance to now. Otherwise, feel free to give some final thoughts on the future of AI, the future of the law firm business model. What do you think? What do you think is going to happen?
I mean, I'm super excited about the potential and how generative AI is going to impact the practice of law. I believe that this is the tipping point, and the billable hour, as it's now structured, is going to change. I think that in the next 2 years, there are going to be some significant changes, and it'll be interesting to see what it looks like. I do think it's going to be some mid-sized firms. I think they're adopting this tech a lot quicker than they have other types of tech. Everybody is. Everywhere I go, everyone's aware of it in a way they haven't been aware of other types of tech. It's getting built into the tools they're already using. So they're using Westlaw and Lexis and VLEX. They're used to AI's there and they know it, So I think it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to happen quicker than we might have thought. And I will be really excited if I am proven correct compared to some of my legal tech colleagues. It'll be great. Some of my journalist friends. So we'll see.
All right. Well, with that, I just see from Mary Hampton thanking us for the discussion. So thank you, Mary, for chiming in live here in the comments. If you want to, if you want to see other future live things, obviously follow me on LinkedIn since we're on LinkedIn. But Niki, you also have a new newsletter for consistent posts that you've been posting every week anyway. But now it's newsletter form. Maybe since we're on LinkedIn, tell folks where they could go to, to follow your new newsletter.
Yeah, for sure. Follow me on LinkedIn. Please connect with me there. And every week on Friday, my newsletter comes out. It's a legal tech reality check. And it is a somewhat snarky reality check about legal tech and the news. And legal tech, it's a broad concept. It's not just legal tech releases or something. It's the intersection of law and technology and different ways that those two are crossing paths and what it looks like. And so I really enjoy the newsletter. It's got, I think, 17,000 subscribers, and it's about a little over a month old, which is exciting. So definitely follow it. And I hope to connect with you on LinkedIn and talk to you there.
All right. And also, I'll give a shout out to Randall Green for thanking us for the conversation, too. So if you want a shout out, make sure to attend the next Law Subscribed Live. We're going to be doing a lot more of these. Niki, stick around for just another minute, but we'll go ahead and sign off here because LinkedIn needs about 8 seconds so we don't get cut off. So thanks, everyone, again for joining us. And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Make someone's day by sharing this episode with them. The best way to get in touch is to follow and message me on LinkedIn. To get extra content, subscribe to the newsletter at www.lawsubscribe.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber to get episodes and content early. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.